Good morning, and welcome to day one of the American Short Story course. I want to just go over how to get started on the reading assignments, but I also want to give a quick background of the beginning of the American Short Story in the U.S. and what brought about its flourishing in the period roughly between 1835 and 1860. But first, let's once again, go to the course menu. I want to briefly review the readings that you need to do. It all starts with the syllabus. And so I'll pop that up, even though I think I've already got one going, just to remind people how to get to it. And again, I would advise that you download the syllabus and save it to your computer. And for now, I'll just use this this way. All right, so when you get to the syllabus, you'll see that the course is exploring the development of the American short story, specifically. And it begins with the roots and definition of the genre in Edgar Allan Poe's literary criticism. So let me just take this opportunity to review what's going on in America in the early 1800s. I've posted some links for you to follow. But basically, why the American short story takes off is because of copyright laws in the United States. So authors had been writing since the founding of America, but it was very difficult to make any money off of it because there were American copyright laws that allowed an author to publish works in the U.S. and potentially make some money off of it. But there was no law in the United States that said that authors couldn't publish English British works. And so what was happening was that the American booksellers and printers were publishing English authors who they didn't have to pay because there were no copyright laws protecting them. So American authors just really didn't have any incentive to publish. But all this changes with the development of copyright laws that end up protecting American authors by forcing publishers to pay for British authors in the 1830s. So all of that is happening while Edgar Allan Poe, Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau are writing their works, but now in the 1830s, they have the incentive to get their works published. So I've given you the two links that you can look up to see the American copyright laws and compare them to the British copyright laws to see how all that was happening. And the next link I want to talk about is the introduction to American Romanticism. And I like Anne Woodliffe's introduction because it's very clear, it's short, and it's very straightforward. But basically, British Romanticism, like I said, these British authors were getting published, explodes with William Wordsworth and Coleridge and Byron and Mary Shelley doing the Romantic Gothic, and you get Frankenstein, and you get all this really popular discussion of nature and the danger of nature. But in the United States, what's happening is with the founding of the country, there's a sense of turmoil in the beginning of the 19th century. And you have authors like Poe and Hawthorne specifically very worried about what the country is going to be. Are there going to be good people running this country? Are there going to be dangerous people running the country? And so you get basically a literature that is that is very interested in the individual power, the individualistic power. And what I find really fascinating about this period is that with the problem of slavery in the United States, where many other countries had already began to abolish it, the United States was one of the last countries to abolish it. And so you get all these intellectuals worried about what the nature of the human being is when it's left on its own in the American continent. And so you get a very dark sense of human nature. And so when you read the short stories of Edgar Allan Poe and of Nathaniel Hawthorne, you find that the core of humanity is very dark. It's incomprehensible. It could be potentially wild, dangerous, um, and then when you read the Transcendentalists, Henry David Thoreau and Emerson, you get a slightly different take. The individual is boundless. There's potential, but there is a sense of danger in all of these texts, and these authors are grappling with it. The authors are all opposed to slavery, and Henry David Thoreau is very actively protesting and talking about this, um, and and so you get this sort of communion of the authors, Melville. And yes, it's all white males at this point, since that's where the power structure is in the United States. But what's interesting is that you get a split where Edgar Allan Poe doesn't like the Transcendentalists. He respects their work, but he says that they've taken the metaphor of nature way too far. And so instead, we get the literature of Hawthorne being what Poe calls the height of literature, and the reason being that it's more realistic. And so in Poe's tales, you see him very invested in talking about actual people doing actual things to one another. But okay, so that's my brief little history. I hope it was brief enough. Let's go back to the syllabus and let's just talk about the way that you need to be reading the syllabus. Please do note that you need to post all your work to 2 places. I've given you some guidelines for how you need to be posting your initial responses and your forum replies to your peers. It's going to be roughly 500 words per post. Posts on Monday night at 11:30 and posts on Wednesday and then Thursday and then on Saturday. So the due dates are that you will be reading these texts and posting them on the day that they are due, right? So I've had you read several other quick little handouts, and what I've asked you to do for these is to skim them. But I do want to, before we start looking at the actual readings, I just want to quickly go over them with you so that I'll just briefly explain them. The questions for literary analysis are designed to get you thinking about these elements of fiction, which is one of the readings for Thursday's class. And basically, they're just really good guideline questions. The questions work in concert with the short terms and definitions. And these are just terms that you will need to know in order to understand the way that we're going to be analyzing the text in the class. And so I would definitely suggest that you download both of these documents. Just have them as at the ready as you start to work on the readings. And again, you want to peruse these. I'm going to be asking you a question about allegory with regard to Hawthorne's short story. And in each week, I will point you to a specific area of the short terms and definitions that you should go and refresh your memory on so that when you work on the questions, you can have the definitions at the ready. But okay, so the first reading is, oops, and it stopped working. Okay. Again, internet problems. I think I might have texted, but not to worry. As long as D2L is working fine, then everything should continue as planned. All right. Okay. So I did have you read the Elements of Fiction. Does it pop it right up? Oh, that's nice. And yeah, again, this is just this is just another kind of background reading that helps you understand the concepts you're going to be using as you analyze the text. I've asked you to read Edgar Allan Poe's very influential discussion of the guidelines for an American literature. And to go back to the discussion, what is happening also in the United States at this point is that American authors are distinguishing themselves from British authors. So that not only is it the issue that copyright is making British authors more widely read in the United States, but there's a sense that, what's the point of reading an American author if it sounds just like a British author? And so what Poe starts to do, it's very clever, is to say, like, we need to make an American literature that is very different from British literature. And so he starts coming up with all these theories, and one of the most important is a theory that he calls the single effect. And in short, what he means by that is that just like poetry, because Poe actually started writing poetry and then he moved to the short story. Just like poetry, the whole poem should be focused on one emotion or one idea. And so he starts he starts writing short stories that are focused on just one main idea. And he creates a way of judging the short story by saying, does every single word contribute to the meaning that is important? And he lays out a couple of rules for how the short story should go, and he says that Nathaniel Hawthorne is doing a great job with this. But okay, so finally, getting to the Hawthorne story. This is going to be my first time actually reading stories online. I do prefer to read them in a book, and I have the story in the book, but I'm gonna in solidarity read the short stories with you online. But yeah, you'll be reading the short stories and responding. Once again, I suggest that you do all your work in a Word document so that when you're writing your response, you will be able to save it as you go and not lose any of your work should, like what just happened to me, Adobe Acrobat crashes while I'm working, although that could be Microsoft Word crashing. But in any case, I think there's just a better chance that you're going to not lose your work if something goes wrong with the internet. So yeah, you're going to save your work to a Word document, and the way that I've set this up is to have you post to the weeks. And in the actual assignment for the week,